The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, I'd like to thank everyone for coming this evening. I'd especially like to thank Kim Flottum. I'm Shane Gebauer. I'm the General Manager of BrushyMtnBeeFarm, and on the other line tonight, I've got Kim Flottum, who is the editor of Bee Culture Magazine. For those of you who don't know Kim, he is, I've referenced him several times in previous webinars. He's probably one of the busiest guys in beekeeping. He is often off at associations, conferences, meeting with beekeepers, giving talks. He's written several books. Of course, I already mentioned that he's the editor of Bee Culture, one of the nation's 2 bee magazines. I think it's probably the best magazine for folks that are getting started in this hobby or been in it for a few years. It's a fantastic learning tool, and I'm pleased to have him with us tonight, and I'm also very thankful that he's taking some time out of his very busy schedule to be with us this evening. So I'd like to introduce him, but before, I'm going to cut him off first for a second. Before we actually get into this, the two of us would just really like to have a sense of where folks are coming from in terms of background and experience, and so that way we can sort of gauge the content of this evening's presentation so that most people can benefit from it. So I'm going to open a poll here. If you would just take a chance and respond, have you checked your colony this year for mites? And just go ahead and select one of those. I've got 66 of you responding, 72. I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to go ahead and close that poll now, and I'll show you the response. So 64% have said yes, they've checked for mites this year. That's great. I've got a follow-up to that now. For those of you that have checked, the 64% of you that have checked, here's another poll question for you. How have you checked? Either using an ether roll, alcohol wash, we'll put alcohol wash in the ether roll category, sugar shake, sticky roll, or sticky board rather. As you can tell, I haven't eaten dinner yet. Sticky roll, a sticky board, or just visual inspection, looking at the adult bees, maybe sort of uncapping some of the drone cells, etc. I've got 58%, 60. I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1, and closing the poll. And I'll show you the results of that. So most of you, 47%, used the sticky board, 35 the visual, and 18% sugar shake. No one's using the ether roll / alcohol wash. So that's great. Pull those down. So now that we have that sort of understanding where folks are, I'm going to turn this over to Kim, and again, I'd really like to express my appreciation for him being with us tonight, and I should preface all of this by saying that we don't charge for this. I haven't charged for webinars in the past. Kim is volunteering his time. Did you know that, Kim? And so I really do appreciate him being here. And this is the first time that I've tried to have sort of a guest speaker. So frankly, this is an experiment, and you're all guinea pigs. And so just bear with us if we experience any sort of technical difficulties or sort of stumble through this a little bit. But rest assured, there's good information tonight, and we'll have some opportunity for question and answer at the end. So Kim, you have the floor.
Good evening, Shane, ladies and gentlemen. What a great opportunity this is. I've been looking forward to trying this technology, and so here we go. I appreciate the information on who's been checking for mites and the techniques you're using, because we're certainly going to address both of those a lot over the next hour. In front of you is the picture of some of my beehives in the winter, getting ready for winter in the middle of June. Why on earth would you start thinking about it now? And I'll tell you, I've learned since Varroa has raised its ugly little head in the last 20-some years, is that the way to get through winter is to take care of the bees that take care of the bees that go into winter. And that's where we are right about now, is we have to have healthy bees raising healthy bees, so those bees can raise healthy winter bees. Without those, we're not going to have any luck, and if we don't take care of them now, well, you might as well just give it up, because come March you're going to have a whole bunch of empty colonies. So we're going to try and answer some questions tonight before they get asked, and then certainly when we're done, we're going to be around for some more questions, because I'm sure we're not going to get everything covered. I think I covered why I think about winter in June, and again, keep that in mind. Keep that in the back of your mind. Take care of the bees that take care of the bees that go into winter. And to do that, of course, you have to have healthy bees now in June, July, August, September. You have to start healthy, you have to get them healthy, and you have to keep them healthy. Primarily, we're going to talk about some of the other things that come up in a colony. But if there's a fact that you take away from here that I'd like to instill upon you, is a recent survey that we did of our magazine readers was of people who quit keeping bees. You know, they left the fold. They took up stamp collecting or duck hunting or something else. And we went to them, we chased them down, and the question was, why did you quit keeping bees? And of all the people that quit, 51%, more than half, quit strictly because of Varroa mites. 20% of them have passed on. So you can see what a big influence Varroa mites have on keeping people in beekeeping, and what an influence it's going to have in keeping you in beekeeping. So when we look at keeping your colony healthy, a big chunk of it's going to be Varroa. You already know that. A lot of you already know that, because you've already been testing for Varroa and taking a look at what you're finding. I want to look a little bit more tonight, maybe analyze some of the data that you've got in a little more detail to help you make some decisions. Of course, you know that Varroa is everywhere except Australia. I think there may be a few pockets that don't have it, but pretty much unless you live in Australia, you can pretty well assume that you've got Varroa, your neighbor's got it, the guy down the road's got it, and probably the people that you bought your bees from have it. So it's endemic in the universe, essentially, for most of us. It's not terribly mobile in terms of walking from hive to hive. So if it's going to get to your bees, you were probably instrumental in it getting there. Not completely. There's some other ways that Varroa gets around. Robbing colonies will leave Varroa behind. Occasionally when a colony crashes, the bees that leave a colony that's infested with Varroa will overtake another colony, and then they'll bring that Varroa with them. One of the things that you're probably aware of is that in a colony, most of the mites in your colony are under cap cells, under cap brood cells, both workers and drone cells. And something like in the neighborhood of 80% of the mites in your colony are hidden from view. So when you're looking for mites, when you're on cap, when you're watching your bees, when you're looking at sticky board, you're only seeing a small percentage of them, because most of them are hidden, reproducing either in drone cells or in worker cells. Now, one of the things I want to look at you, the numbers you're seeing in front of you, reproducing under cap cells. These numbers are I put these up here because they're pretty aggressive. In a good situation, when you've got lots of brood and you've got a colony that's stressed and you've got Varroa that are really challenging a colony, one fertile female mite that enters a drone cell can, under conditions favorable to the mite, and produce 27 offspring in 30 days. So you take a look at that one female mite. 30 days later, she's produced 27 offspring. If that fertile mite goes into a worker cell, after 30 days, you're looking at only 8 offspring. So you can see that you can see why Varroa favored drone cells. It's 3 to 1, almost a little over 3 to 1 in terms of how many offspring. Varroa aren't any different than any other animal. The more offspring they produce, the more likely they are to pass their genes on into the future generations. So a female Varroa mite's taking a look, and if she's got a choice between a worker cell and a drone cell, of course she's going to probably pick the drone cell if she can find it. How do you stop that? Well, I start with looking at all of the principles of integrated pest management. They should be going from the time you dump your package in the spring, you're beginning to look at Varroa control. You just cannot ignore it. You can play with it a little bit, but I'll go back to 50% of the people who quit keeping bees quit because Varroa killed their colonies enough times that they just give up. So when you're starting in the spring, when you're starting as a beginner with a package, or you bought a nuke, or you've got overwintered colonies, whatever it is, you're looking at what am I doing to stop, to slow, to harm, if you will, Varroa, to slow the reproductive rate, to stop the reproductive rate, to do anything I can to keep my bees healthy, my bees unchallenged, if you will, by this pest. You're looking at some of the easier ways to work with Varroa in your colony. Up there on the right-hand side, you're seeing this drone comb, and what you're seeing is this is what happens. A female Varroa mite moves into a cell, the cell gets capped, and she starts reproducing. And for me, this is to me the easiest way to work with Varroa populations in your colony. If you take a look at what bees do on an average colony, if you will, I'm not sure that there is such a thing, but on an average colony, a colony is going to dedicate somewhere between 10 and 15% of its comb space to producing drone comb. If the colony is healthy, the environment is favorable, there's enough food, and things are going well for the colony. So if you've got, it depends on how many frames and the size of your colony, and we're going to look at that in a minute. So you can figure that there's going to be drone comb in your colony anyway. No matter what you do, on a healthy colony in a good environment, a colony is going to make drones. That's their job. Their job is to, again, like the Varroa, is to produce that genetic message to pass on to future generations. So if they're going to make drone comb, my first thought is take advantage of that drive, if you will, and provide it for them. That way you know where it is and you can control it. And it's just like having a movable frame. When Langstroth invented the movable frame, if you make that movable frame contain nothing but drone comb, and that's where the bees are going to put it, and that's where the Varroa are going to go, to me it tends to be a no-brainer. They've got in the middle there, you've got the Pureco drone comb plastic frame. Put that in and let them draw it out. This one's very well drawn out, very even, good pattern. Queen's doing a good job. The one down below is one out of one of my colonies, and that was put in just as an empty frame. They had to produce all of the wax. There was no foundation in there, of course, and it's kind of a spotty frame, but it did what I needed it to do. So what I'm doing, if you go back to the numbers and you look at a colony is going to produce, a healthy colony is going to produce somewhere between 10 and 15%. That's about 3 frames in a 2-deep colony. Or it's even 3 frames. I use 8-frame equipment in mediums almost exclusively. And again, that's about 3, maybe 4 frames in my brood nests are 3 medium deep, or 3 medium supers tall rather than 2 deeps. And I've got 4 frames in those three brood boxes. So that's how I'm mixing it. I'd rather have a few extra. I'd rather have extra frames in there and the bees not use them than to not have enough and have them start putting putting drone comb where they want it and me not having control over it. Down on the left-hand corner there, so, well, let me finish drone comb first. To me, this is when you start in the spring, not a package, but if you've got a nuke that you started with, or certainly if you've got overwintered colonies, drone comb, empty frame, some place to have controllable drone comb in that colony. To me, that's just as necessary as an inner cover or a cover. It should be in your colony all of the time. Rather have it and the bees not need it than to not have it and the bees want to put drone comb someplace. Shane, you got a picture down there of that sugar duster. You want to tell me how that works?
Yeah, but before I do, I actually want to go back to the drone just a little bit. Kim, you and I were talking earlier today. Of course, this plastic frame up here is one from my hive, as you mentioned, and this is one from your hive. You had some interesting things that you were doing with, because this is a foundationless frame that you just put in there, and they just naturally built out the drone. You had some interesting things that you were doing with this comb when you removed that frames, because in fear of the consequences of the significant other finding a drone frame in the freezer. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Well, there's lots of things you can do with that. Of course, if you take a look at the green frame up there, the plastic frame, when you pull it from the colony, it looks like this, the putty knife or hive tool, you can scrape it off and put it back in, and the bees are ready to use it. It's got to do something with what you've scraped off. The same way with the frame down below, which has no plastic foundation in the center of it. And my quick and dirty technique is I've got a 5-gallon pail with me in the bee yard, and I'm just punching that out and filling up that pail, putting an empty frame back in the colony. It's out of so I don't have to have double frames. I don't have to take a frame out, go do something with it, and then either put it back in later or have another one to put in at the time. I'm not doubling up my equipment. So what I do with, what I do with the foundation and the comb and the brood that I pull out of there is I've got a platform, and I put it up on top of the platform near a bird feeder, and the birds just love it. They'll pick that clean before I can get out of the bee yard almost. They're waiting for me now. They know they can see me coming. But if you've got chickens or you've got, it's easy to do, or none of the above, throw it into a wax melter and make candles out of it. There's kind of a sweet revenge, if you will, in watching all of those Varroa mites float down in the stream of wax and get caught in the filter before they go out of the wax melter. So but it's expensive in terms of the colony. They got to build a lot of wax. A lot of wax takes a lot of honey. So I'm investing a lot of energy. The bees are investing a lot of energy doing it the way I do.
And how often are you rotating out your frame?
Well, you can figure drones from the time an egg goes in until the time a drone emerges is about 24 days. So from the day that I put that frame in there, I'm looking 3 weeks, 21 days. That way I'm ahead of the very earliest drone, and almost never, because it takes time for them to build up this comb. They're usually longer before they've got sealed drone comb than they would in the frame up above it. It's just a little bit faster. So what I'm doing is I'm rotating those drone combs in my colonies. I've got them on 2 different schedules. I'm taking 2 on one time and 1 on the next time, so that they've always got a comb that's ready for the queen to lay in, and they've got a comb or 2 that they're building up, getting ready for her to lay in. So because I'm in my bees just about once a week, I can eyeball it and pull them up. If you're on a schedule and you get out to either a bee yard or your colony or your backyard, whatever it is, you can figure 21 days, 20 to 21 days. 3 weeks is going to be, that window will give you enough time that you're not going to miss it. Because if you take a look at that green comb, and if you figure there's 3 Varroa mites in every one of those cells, and you're 2 days late, what's going to happen? You're going to have, well, you probably just signed a death sentence for that colony. So being late is not acceptable, I guess, in this situation if you're looking at controlling Varroa mites.
Certainly not the method for procrastinators to try and maintain their mite population. You asked about this contraption down here. This is a new product that we've brought in this year. It's actually made in Italy, and well, for lack of a better description, it's a modified fireplace bellows with a canister mounted on its side right here. So you sort of obstructed by the Laurie, our person in the office. Here is the bellows, sort of obstructed by her, with this canister that's filled with powdered sugar. And then coming out down here, you can see this sort of wand or probe that can be inserted into the entrance of the hive. And the nice thing about this is that you can go down fairly quickly through a row of hives, stick this probe in, and puff that bellows several times. And it's difficult to see, and I actually have it obscured by the screen bottom board here. But what happens is powdered sugar can actually come billowing out the top, and these are 3 medium chambers right here, and we've got powdered sugar coming out the top. So it's a very quick, easy way to dust your bees with powdered sugar to try and dislodge some mites. The other thing that I've thought about with this is, most people, when they're using powdered sugar, they dump it on their top bars and sort of sweep it down between their frames, or use a flour sifter or something like that, and so they're applying it from the top down, which means if you have honey supers on, it's going into your honey supers. With this, you're working from the bottom up, and it's really concentrating it into those brood chambers as opposed to the honey supers, which I think is an added benefit. And they've been doing really well. People have been quite happy with them.
Well, it's certainly safe. I don't mind a little sugar residue in my hive ever.
Yeah, it's definitely a nice alternative to some of the other things out there, I think.
Well, the other thing you've got up there is a sticky board, and of course that's got grids on it which enable you to make counting easy. I think there's one more thing we want to look at in terms of IPM, Shane, and that's if there's any kinds of names for it: a midsummer split, or a summer split, or a fall split. Lots of ways to do it. Basically, the outline of it is that what you're looking to do is you're looking to make a split off from a large colony, and make that colony, give that colony brood and bees and honey and some pollen, and certainly the brood is going to need to have some eggs. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and this is the way that I found that works for me the best, just because of the time schedule that I'm on and the time that it takes the bees to do this. What I like to do is I like to pull that brood frame out, making sure that there's lots of eggs in it. And I may have to pull 2 frames out of a colony to get enough open brood and sealed brood, and then one with some eggs in it. But what I want those bees to do in that split, and I'm going to give them some food, and I'm going to give them some sugar, and I'm going to give them some protein so that they're not challenged that way, is I want them to start making some queen cells. Excuse me. And in fact, I'd like to see them make a lot of queen cells and put a lot of time and effort, because a queen cell and lots of queen cells in a colony help keep it organized. The pheromones from even a queen cell help keep a colony organized, even when they're queenless. So I like to see them build out a lot of queen cells. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be watching that colony, and when those queen cells are just about ready to be sealed or have just been sealed, then what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be requeening that colony with a queen that I want. And we can talk about that later. Certainly the most important aspect of integrated pest management is to use resistant varieties. So I'm always looking at how to, what's the best queen to put in there. But on my summer split, what I want to do is I'm going to, once those queen cells are capped, the first one is capped, I'm going to be in there. This is where you can't be a good procrastinator, which I tend to be sometimes. You're in there and you're pulling all of those queen cells out of there. You may use them someplace else, or you may just be destroying them, or whatever. But you want them all out of there. You can't miss any. Let me rephrase that. You can't miss any, and then you're requeening with the queen of your choice. This is certainly one of the ways that you will find out how much you dislike old, crunched up frames. You've got frames that have been mouse damaged or run through an extractor before and got dinged up, and you're going to find out that if there is a nook or a cranny where those bees can hide a queen cell, they're going to find it, and there'll be 2 in there probably. So you're going to find out real fast that old crummy frames are not good in your bees for all sorts of reasons, this being just one of them. What this does is you've given this colony a long broodless period, and once you put this queen in, it's going to remain broodless because she has to come out and she has to get oriented to the colony, and she's going to start laying not real fast. So you've got your colonies had a long time where they have either no brood or hardly any brood, and the Varroa mites that were in brood have emerged, and they've had an opportunity to get rid of them. You're either dusting them with sugar, or the bees themselves have been removing them. So without doing anything harsh to your colony, you have now a new colony that is headed by a new queen that is ready to go in the middle to late summer. So she's going to be producing bees, lots of bees that are ready to take off. At the same time, you've been feeding both protein and sugar, so you've got a colony that's not challenged. Before you did this, you made sure that all of the other things that are going on, that can go on in colonies, all of the diseases and pests are in check. So you've got a colony that's ready to go to the moon here, ready to take off strong, and the mite population is very low, going to be very low, and you're going to help it get even lower. So this is a really good technique, in my opinion, to increase your colonies, get new queens into your colonies, and give Varroa a run for its money without having to do anything with poison. So this is one of the IPM techniques I really, really encourage people to follow up on too, because next year you got more colonies and they're all healthy.
Kim, I'm really excited about this. This notion of splitting as an IPM technique, but I've got to, and one of the reasons is that a commercial beekeeper that I know says that he tries to maintain 5 to 10%. If he's got, and let me rephrase it, if he's got 100 colonies, he wants to have 5% of those in the forms of nukes, so that he can reestablish a dead out that may occur. He's got those that he can overwinter with and replace any that may have not come through winter well, things like that. So I like this technique for that reason, and so that's my statement. But I have a question for you. When you requeen a colony, now this is just a straight old colony, you're requeening a colony, the best method, I think anyway, is you pinch the queen and you insert the new one right away, so they don't have a chance to start building cells. If in this scenario where you're allowing your nuke to build cells, and then going through and cutting them all out, and I'd like to sort of reinforce that point that you're cutting them all out. I've made that mistake where I missed 1 or 2, and that's all it takes. But you're cutting them all out. Do you wait after you've removed all those queen cells to insert your new queen, or do you do it just like you were requeening a colony and you put her right in?
I put them right in, and there's several schools of thought on that. That you wait a day after you remove them, and you give the bees even a greater chance to you anthropomorphize, if you will, to a point where, yes, they miss the queen cells, and that gives them makes them more receptive to a new queen. And there's to be honest, I don't know if that's correct or not. I don't have anything to say one way or another because I don't have enough experience in observing that behavior. My My technique comes down to a function of time. I've got time to one trip to the bee yard. Okay, I went through and I made the split, and I let them raise cells. I've come back. I don't have, and I'm going to get rid of cells. I don't have time to come back in the day. I almost never have time to come back in the day and requeen now. So mine is a function more of time and energy than perhaps utilizing bee behavior to its best.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Kim was talking earlier about how one reproductive female mite that enters into drone cells is capable of producing 27 offspring in just 30 days. So we're seeing that exponential growth, and this is sort of a visual interpretation of that. This graph is sort of for a temperate environment. Of course, it would vary a little bit, maybe shift one way or the other, 1 month earlier, 1 month later, depending on where you're located in the U.S. or elsewhere. But generally speaking, this is what we're going to see. And this is, again, just to emphasize the point of why we're talking about getting ready for winter in June, which seems a very unlikely time to be talking about winter. In fact, isn't the first day of summer this weekend? So why are we doing this? Well, this sort of suggests that you see this exponential growth in bees. At least we hope we do anyway. And lagging behind that slightly is this exponential growth in mites. So the peaks are offset a little bit. So here we are basically in June, our populations are reaching their maximum, but if we don't do anything, the mite population is hitting its maximum in August or September. And we know, or at least hopefully we know, I've mentioned this in other talks, previous webinars, that these Varroa are vectoring viruses. Much like a mosquito can transmit malaria, these Varroa can transmit viruses as well. And in fact, one of those viruses is called deformed wing syndrome. And here's an example. You have sort of these spaghetti strand-like wings on the bee, and you can also see the Varroa there on that bee right here, so you get a sense of scale, as well as here's another one on what appears to be a healthy bee. But deformed wing virus is just one example of several viruses that can be vectored by these mites. So if our population of mites reaches this sort of level, the virus load then is also reaching a very high level. And so if we start thinking about, well, if we think about Varroa management all year long, and not even now, but back here in the earlier months of the year, in spring, we'll be much better off. But certainly we need to really think about it in June as well. And one of the reasons, this is sort of a complicated illustration, but one of the reasons is that these viruses are transmitted in that colony not only by Varroa, so a bee doesn't necessarily just have to be bitten, so to speak, by a Varroa, but they can spread bee to bee. So a worker can spread it to other workers. And so once you get these viruses in the colony, you have this potential for it to sort of run rampant in the colony. And also what's really interesting, this is when it spreads from bee to bee like this, it's known as horizontal transmission. But what's also very interesting is here's our queen, and she's laying an egg, and now we're getting what's known as vertical transmission, where it's going from egg to larva to pupa to the adult bee. So what we see then are these viruses being transmitted from Varroa to the adult bees in the colony. Those viruses spread from worker to worker, but also from queen to egg and back to worker again, or to adult bee. And so we need an opportunity then. We need to give this colony an opportunity for these viruses to sort of purge and cleanse out of that hive. And like Kim said right at the onset, we need to take care of the bees take care of the bees that get us through winter. Was there another taking care in there? I forget how many taking cares there were, but we need 2 to 3, if not more, generations of bees to sort of help purge these viruses from that colony. And in fact, here's some data that Dennis Van Engelsdorp at Penn State shared with me. This is from a study where he was looking at a flash formic treatment. This is the formic acid. These are the two. Oops, getting a little careless with my marker there. But these are the 2 graphs I'm interested in. This is the number of dead mites that were showing up on a sticky board prior to treatment. This is the level of dead mites after treatment. So it worked quite well. This was a 17-hour treatment. It killed a lot of mites. But what we saw after that treatment, this is deformed wing virus level. Of course, it was quite high before treatment, but it's still actually quite high 4 weeks after that treatment. So a full month after the flash formic treatment, we still have only cut our viral load in maybe a little more than half. 4 weeks after that treatment. So 4 weeks after the mite population crashed, we still see a fairly high viral load. And so again, this is only to illustrate and emphasize the point that we need to think about these sorts of issues now rather than in September and October, when historically, frankly, most beekeepers, and if you've got mentors that have been doing this for a long time, they may even be saying that, oh, you'll have time in October to treat. They'll still be producing bees at that point. But at that point, they may only get 1 generation reared under low mite conditions, and that's not sufficient time to sort of cleanse the hive of these viruses that are persisting there.
That goes a long way, Shane, in supporting beginning control where I'm at when there's still snow on the ground. I'm looking in March for October control, and that just goes a long way to show it.
It raises an interesting point, too, in terms of seasonality. There's a mutual friend that we have, Kim, Aaron in New York State, who said that spring to us is getting close to summer for bees, that the bees' season is actually a month or 2 earlier than what we think of as our seasons. So your point of, thinking about this sort of thing when snow's still on the ground, I mean, that's sort of spring for a bee, but it's still winter for us. So we need to sort of move our scale to adjust for that and think of the seasons in terms of bees and not necessarily our own seasons, our calendar seasons. Did you want to talk about some of these numbers that we've got here and what they mean?
The sticky board you're looking at there was taken from a colony that probably came off that graph you just showed. It was loaded with bees. This was done some time ago when Coumaphos was working very well, and we stuck Coumaphos strips in a large colony, very large colony, late in the summer, and it rained Varroa for a couple of days.
Yeah, I'll just interrupt for a second, Kim, if you don't mind, and just for people that don't know, that may not have seen them, all these little red dots that I'm clicking on here and sort of adding a little yellow to, these are all Varroa mites. It's a little blurry, but there are just, well, right here, probably several hundred in this little image.
This is over 3 days.
Okay.
So on the left there, this is a chart. One of the things that most people are looking for is how do I analyze it? Many of the people that are listening to this have already looked at their Varroa populations, and in fact many using sticky boards. But what's it telling me? And the 3 things you need to look at are when are you taking that sample, and how big is the colony you are taking it from. those two things are the two important. And there's another dimension. This is really a three-dimensional chart, and we don't have the third dimension on there. And right now, I don't have a good feel for what that third dimension is, and that is the strain of bee that you are measuring. And the bees that we use, Italians, Carniolans, survivor bees or mixed bees or whatever, Russians definitely, whatever you're using, Carniolans aren't going to react the same in the spring as Italians, aren't going to react the same as Russians, aren't going to react the same as your local mongrel in all probability. And that too has to be taken into consideration. And that's not on this chart. So when you're looking at these numbers, keep that in the back of your mind, is if you have Italians in your colonies, they're going to go like gangbusters. And they're going to go like gangbusters all year. That's what they know to do, and that's what they do well. Carniolans are going to react in the spring a little bit differently. Certainly Russians are going to react differently in the spring. When you're expecting when you have a big Italian colony, you're going to have a smaller, in all probability, have a smaller population Russian colony just because of the strain of bees. So looking at these numbers, keep that in the back of your mind, but some generalizations here. I've taken these numbers, I've queried some of the researchers that have done this over the years, looking at integrated pest management and trying to develop thresholds of what to do when. And what we've been able to put together when you take a look at hive size, small, medium, and large, and then seasons, spring, summer, and fall. And I'll kind of give you a definition of the hive size. Small is what I consider to be 4 frames of bees and brood in a 5-frame nuke. That's a small colony. Now that may be the split that we just talked about, or it might be the split that you bought from a supplier this spring. A medium colony is what I consider to be a medium colony here is probably a 10-frame deep with about 7 or 8 frames of bees and brood. Certainly drawn comb on the rest of the frames in that deep, and then a honey super on top, or perhaps another deep that's mostly empty. So that's what I consider to be a medium-sized colony for sake of this chart. A large colony then move up and you've got 2 10-frame deeps, 6 to 8 frames of bees and brood in both of the supers, and probably at least 1 and probably 2 honey supers on it because they're beginning to pack it in. The population is such that they've got enough bees to take care of a lot of brood, which frees up even more bees to gather honey. So when you're looking at the size of the colony, you have to take that into consideration. How many bees are going to be in there? And when is it? If you've got an overwintered colony and it's small, you've got a medium colony and it's in the spring and it's in the spring and the large and the same thing, and you put a sticky trap in there, you leave it in there for 3 days, you pull it out after 3 days, you count the mites, you divide by 3, that's giving you mites per day. Those are the numbers that researchers, commercial beekeepers, my experience, and sometimes a gut feeling will tell you that when I get to this number on a small colony in the spring and I do a sticky trap, and if I've got 15 mites on that sticky board, 15 mites per day, I'm at the level where I need to interfere with that mite population somehow. Same thing with medium and large. If I've got just in the spring, if I've got fewer than 30 mites, fewer than 40 mites, I'm seeing those numbers. I know that I gotta be doing something, because the mite population you saw in Shane's graph, it's going gangbusters, and the bees may or may not be able to keep up with it. The mites are probably going to win. Summer and fall, you can see the same kinds of numbers. When you get to those numbers on your sticky trap, that's when the bees are standing up there looking you in the eye and saying, folks, we got a problem here, you got to do something, or we're not going to be here next spring. So that's what those numbers are telling you, Shane, and I don't have hard science behind any of them, but I got good science and good beekeeper experience behind them. I'm pretty comfortable with those numbers and telling people, when you see those numbers on a sticky board, it's time to get busy.
Kim, you mentioned right at the very beginning the importance of, or sort of that third dimension, which is the type of bee or queen that you've got in that colony. And I think it's important to know that not only, these numbers are sort of a piece of the puzzle. They're not absolute by any stretch. And one of the pieces of information that can also help us is knowing what's happening over time. I think a lot of times beekeepers, they check and say, oh, well, my mites are fine and the level's low. They don't necessarily go back maybe until it's too late, but they don't go back. And so it's important to monitor your mite levels, not just once a year in the fall, but track it over the course of a season. And that may help a little bit address your point of that third dimension. If you're seeing that you've got a colony that's, say, a small colony in spring and it's running 10 mites, it's below that level, getting close, a little bit of a concern, but you test it again in another couple of weeks and it's still at 10, that's a good sign. That's a bit of information. Perhaps those bees are doing something to help keep, or your management technique is doing something to keep the mite population relatively stable. And so it's, I think, important, too, to track this stuff over time. And we talked a little bit, Kim, about how often, and we said about every 3 weeks we thought was a good time frame for checking on your mite levels. Is that right?
Well, that's probably the longest I'd want to go.
Okay.
Between 2 and 3 weeks, and you're looking at the reproductive cycle of the bees that you're working with. Every time a 10-day flush of drones hatches, your mite population can double. So if you wait 20 days, which is essentially 3 weeks, that mite population can really explode, and it's going to get ahead of you. Of course, if I suggested that you're out there every 2 weeks counting mites, you're going to throw things at me, and I don't blame you. But
it's a good thing we're in cyberspace.
That's one of the things you want to look at is and your comment is exactly right. Is look at it over time. The other thing, Shane, that you brought up earlier is I've got 5 colonies out there. Which one do I test them all? Do I test one? Do I test 2? Where do I get a level of confidence that the numbers I'm generating are speaking for the whole apiary or for all of my bees? And I'm not sure I've got a good handle on that. You got a thought?
Well, for consistency's sake, I think it would be important to select one, and two, a lot of the non-commercial type beekeepers, they're going to get queens from a single supplier, or maybe they mix it up a little bit. But if they do, they probably have a little bit more information about the genetics of that queen. If you've got 5 hives and you've bought a Russian queen that, and of course they're known for their increased resistance, that's probably not the one out of the 5 that you want to be sampling. So choose one of the others, but it's not, and stick with that one. So again, you can see that trend over time, but it might be good maybe every other time to sample one of the other hives to see if your numbers are sort of consistent. I think that would be a good approach, but I think for consistency's sake, it would be good to always go to that same hive so you can see that trending population through time. But again, use a little bit of discretion and maybe not sample the Russian colony every single time, or if you've got one of the Minnesota hygienics, something like that, probably, and you're testing that queen, 1 queen out of 10 or 5 or so, probably not the one you want to be sampling. If we get to that point, if we get to those levels, hopefully we've been employing IPM techniques that we talked about earlier, maybe some other ones that are out there, to try and keep that population low. But if we get to some of those numbers that we were just discussing, IPM at that point is not going to necessarily be the best option. It's not going to address the population of mites in a fast enough fashion to bring the population down before your bee population begins to collapse. So we need to start thinking then about some other means of intervention. And I tend to, most people that are listening in probably have heard me speak before and sort of have a sense of my management style. I tend to go sort of more natural and use approaches such as that. And I really like these two products here. The one on the left, this one over here, this is Apolife Var. These tablets are little wafer-like things that are impregnated, soaked with a mixture of essential oils. So it's all natural. And what happens is you put this on the hive and they sort of gas off those essential oils. One of them is eucalyptol, thymol, camphor oil, things like that. So those fumes go through the hive and kill off the mites. And the bees will oftentimes take care of these tablets for you. The other method that I like is this over here. This is Mite Away 2. This uses an organic acid that is naturally found in honey. It's formic acid. It's a food-grade organic acid that they're using. And again, it evaporates in the hive, and the fumes disperse through that colony and kill off the mites. Both of these have pros and cons. I'll point out, perhaps I shouldn't, but you can probably make out the skull and crossbones down there on the formic acid. It doesn't really bode well for that product, but it's required. The EPA required that they put that on there. It's not quite that bad, but that scares some people, and that's fine. In that case, I would probably suggest using something like the Apolife Var. Also, Apolife Var has a little bit higher temperature range that it can handle. So, if you're using this as say a fall treatment, Apolife Var would be a better option because if you're here in the South anyway. The fall time temperatures are such that it would probably exceed the range for the Mite Away 2. Now, if you're up where Kim is, fall time temperatures, the fall days are just lovely, and aren't they? And you
Absolutely.
You can the Mite Away 2. You'd probably be within the temperature range for the Mite Away 2 if you're up in the northern climates. Springtime, we've got a little bit more flexibility pretty much across the nation, and we can usually find a temperature range that meets our needs. We have also got a little bit more flexibility in terms of Varroa populations at that point, generally speaking. So these are really good products. There are some other ones out there that a lot of people use, but these are the two that I think are sort of consistent with the philosophy of IPM.
I think at the same time, Shane, if you've been monitoring Varroa, we spend a lot of time on Varroa for obvious reasons, but there's a lot of other stuff out there that if we don't pay attention to, they're going to come up and bite you. You've got some pictures right there of things that can go wrong with your queens. You've got to be monitoring your queens. Laying worker colonies can be disastrous, especially later in the summer, so you should be on top of that. Wax moth, of course, can get into a weaker colony or into stored equipment. Small hive beetle, something I don't have to worry about. When I was down in your neck of the woods last week, I saw more small hive beetle than I've ever seen. It wasn't a lot, but I saw more than I've ever seen. So I got a taste of that suddenly, and I'm really glad we don't have to deal with it. And of course, the colony on the left is a kind of disgusting representation of Nosema, and that new Nosema serrani, even the old Nosema apis, have suddenly come to suddenly started to draw a lot of attention. They can certainly be debilitating on a colony and even lethal on a colony, and you can't look at your bees and say, yeah, they got Nosema. No, they don't have Nosema. It takes a spore count, which is a microscope in a lab. If you suspect that you've got Nosema, you're going to want to do several things, and one of them is take a sample of bees, get it tested, and find out what your spore count is. If you send them into the Beltsville Bee Lab, they will come back with an answer that says, yes, you have nosema. They're not going to tell you which one. Doesn't make a whole lot of difference if you've got 8 or 10 million spores per bee in your sample. As I understand it, the sort of the cutoff is about 1 million to 2 million spores per bee, and then after above that, you've hit the threshold and you're going to want to start doing something, or the nosema is going to spread within your colony to the adult bees, and it tends to be a one-way trip. Two things you want to look at, and you've got the picture you've got up there is showing fumagillin B, which is an antibiotic. There's a good number of people that are frowning right now because I don't want to put an antibiotic in my colony, and I'm one of them. I really strongly have real strong feelings about putting antibiotics on my bees. This works. It's good stuff, and you can use it, and it will given the proper dose and the proper timing, really help with help clear up a nosema problem. In the center there is something called Honeybee Healthy, and Honeybee Healthy, and there are several products on the market that are very similar to this. Is a phagostimulant, a feeding stimulant. It makes bees want to eat. And when even if you're using fumagillin B, or you're just trying to get food into your bees, because one of the biggest problems that bees have when they have nosema is they quit eating. And the little bit that they do eat, they're fighting the nosema organism for internally. So not only don't they eat much, what they do eat is getting used against them by the nosema. So combating, the way I like to combat nosema is to get them to eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. And a good feeding stimulant like Honeybee Healthy is going to work, but there are others out there. I certainly don't want to point at only this one. It's the concept of a good diet, both carbohydrates and protein. You've got another product there I'm not familiar with, Shane. What is that?
Appa Herb is a new product this year. It's made by a company over in Italy. It comes in a powder form, and you mix it in with a little sugar water or corn syrup, and you trickle it down, you sort of dribble it down between the frames, and so it falls directly onto the bees. And so your point of sort of encouraging them any way possible to eat, well, by trickling it onto the bees, it sort of encourages them. Of course, now they're covered with sugar of some sort, and so they begin to clean one another. And in doing so, they of course get fed because they're getting the syrup or sugar water from their neighbor, and also getting this Appa Herb, which is in that solution. And it's similar to Honeybee Healthy in that it's a mixture of essential oils that helps sort of stabilize digestional balance. Now, they've done some studies with this over in Europe, some trial studies, and compared it to fumagillin B, and they found that actually in many cases it was just as effective at reducing spore counts as the fumagillin B. So there's a lot of promise for this, and we think it's a great thing. Now, I should mention, Kim, that Honeybee Healthy came out on the market, maybe 5-6 years ago or so.
Or even longer, yeah.
Or maybe even a little longer. And when it first came out, I'm sort of with you, where I try not to put anything in my hive that doesn't belong there. And I thought Honeybee Healthy, they were promoting it as a feeding stimulant and essential oils. And really, I thought, frankly, that this was a product more for the beekeeper than for the bees, that a beekeeper could use this and they would feel good about themselves taking good care of their bees, and that it was more of a fluff product than anything else. I've sort of come around on that quite a bit. Out at the ABF meeting, the American Beekeeping Federation, out in Reno this past year, they really were promoting the importance and highlighting the importance of feeding. And one of the beekeepers out there said that one of the largest beekeepers out there said that this product alone saved his operation. That was quite an endorsement from someone that does this for a living. So I've sort of come around a little bit, and I think your point of this as sort of stimulating the bees to feed, getting some nutrition into them, getting them healthy, reducing stress really has a lot of merit.
There's an old saying, or maybe it's a saying old beekeepers use, I'm not sure which, but nothing helps a colony so much as a good honey flow. And that good honey flow, of course, is stimulating bees to eat, and it gets them to collect more nectar and to process honey, and this is what the same concept here is once you get bees to start eating and to keep eating, once you can get food into them, they're going to be healthier. They're going to be able to make the brood food. If they're not eating protein, the brood food that they're making is certainly going to be of less quality, and they're feeding bees. And it goes back to take care of the bees that take care of the bees. You got healthy bees feeding brood, they're going to be healthy. They're going to grow up healthy, and they in turn are going to be able to take care of brood better. So it goes hand in hand.
I think one of the things that often gets overlooked is the harvesting of the honey, and not necessarily the act of the harvest, but how much we take and when we take it. A lot of beekeepers wait until the very last minute to harvest all their honey so they can get every last drop of maybe that goldenrod flow that's taking place late in the summer. And in doing so, you're also taking the last drop or the last opportunity that colony has to store winter reserves, because of course we know bees don't go dormant, they don't hibernate, they're in the colony active all winter long, and so it's important that we make sure they have sufficient stores, that we don't take too much. They need, and this is again just a very crude generalization, 60 to 80 pounds worth of honey to overwinter on. And if you're up north, you're tending more towards the 80 pounds, and if you're down south, you're tending more towards the 60 pounds. But we need to make sure that we need to make sure that these bees have enough honey to overwinter on. As a guide, a really good, full, deep frame of honey is going to have about 8 pounds worth of honey. A really full medium frame is going to have maybe around 6 pounds of honey. So as you're going through your hive, you can sort of begin to add this up and say, well, this frame's about half full, and it's a deep, so maybe that's about 4 pounds, and this one's 3/4 full, so that's about 6 pounds, and you can begin to get a tally. And also what I like to do is sort of the hive check, you lift the corner. Once you've tallied up those frames, lift the corner of the hive and feel how heavy it is. So you've got sort of this tally that you've collected by going through the frames, and maybe you've got 50 pounds or 60 pounds or whatever it is you've tallied up. Lift the corner and say, oh, well, that's what 50 pounds of honey feels like. And you can get a gauge that way too, so you can do a real crude assessment occasionally to see how you're doing. And of course, if you're not, or if you are going to take honey, all the honey, and don't leave them the 60 to 80 pounds, you need to be sure that you're feeding them. You need to be sure that either you're giving back in the form of corn syrup or sugar water, so that they can store that down into their brood chamber. If you're mixing up sugar water, you want to boil the water first, but then take it off the heat before you add the sugar. Otherwise, you can caramelize it a little bit. And you want to add 2 parts sugar to 1 part water. It doesn't matter whether you're doing it by weight or volume. The bees aren't that fussy, but you want a thicker mixture in fall because they're going to be storing this in their comb, and you don't want it fermenting in there. So you want a thicker mixture in fall than you do in spring. And we already talked a little bit about that Honeybee Healthy. You can put a little bit into that feed, encourage them to get in there, eat it up, get healthy, get nutrition, and that'll go a long way. Kim, did you want to talk a little bit about the pollen patties? I'll be honest with you. I usually feed pollen in the spring to stimulate brood production. Why would we want to think about this time of year?
I think last summer was probably the lesson we all learned, was that because of the drought in many parts of the country, plants weren't producing much pollen. If any pollen, the pollen that they were producing was of lower quality, even if the bees were collecting it. And last year and the year before, what happened was, even though bees had pollen, it was a lousy product, if you will. And even though they stored it when they started feeding it the following spring or during the winter, when they started rearing brood, they were feeding a inferior product. And of course, you can't raise good, healthy bees when you're feeding them lousy pollen. My contention, and I'll go back even before, we didn't have a drought when the rest of the country was having a drought, but my contention has always been, but certainly one of the things that I recommend is that, does your colony have enough pollen? And, you know, a visual observation, you can see sometimes you get bees just go nuts and you've got frames and frames of pollen, almost to the point where you don't have enough room for brood and you don't have enough room for honey. Sometimes you may have to cull some of that pollen or pull it out and freeze it and save it for next spring or something. But if you don't have pollen, and the other half of the equation is a lot of pollen stored with honey on top, can you tell the difference? Can you look at a cell and say, yeah, that's got pollen under it? Well, I can't. I'm not that good. And you can dig a few out with a pocket knife or a toothpick and get an idea. What's a lot easier for me is if I have to guess if they got enough pollen to get them through the winter and into next spring on that first flush of brood that I want them just ready to go, I'm going to get one of these pollen supplements, patties that you can buy for $1.50 or so. I'll cut it in half and I'll throw it on a colony. If they eat it, they needed it. If they don't eat it, they didn't need it. To me, it's cheap insurance. I would much rather spend 75 cents and find out that the colony doesn't want this stuff because they're happy with what they've got, than to not do it and find out that my colony is really lagging behind next spring and I've wasted a lot of time that I could have made up for this year. Of course, if pollen supplement isn't what you're looking for and you want the real thing, right now is a good time to get a pollen trap on and start trapping some of that. You can put it on your cereal, you can feed it to your bees, you can sell it. It's a product that's not going to go to waste. If you've got pollen next spring and you want to feed it, you can put it in a patty, make up patties. There's lots of recipes for it. Your bees are going to love it. They're going to do better for it, and you're going to be ahead of the game. So when it comes to feeding carbohydrates, you mentioned corn syrup. I tend to stick to just sugar syrup, but any of those with, you mentioned Shane, putting Honey Bee Healthy in there, and there's one of the things that we often don't think about. There isn't a dance that the bees have that tells you there's food 4 inches right above your head. And if you put something in there, and whether it's Honey Bee Healthy or it's a food-grade peppermint oil, just enough, and give it an odor, they're going to find it. You'll find colonies sometimes that never find that feeder. And one of the reasons is there's no way to say, hey, dummy, right up there is all the food we can ever want. They never find it, or they're never able to convey that message because there's no that kind of communication that's a learned thing as opposed to being able to show somebody. So if you're going to feed sugar syrup and you're going to use this kind of a feeder above the head, above the colony, give it a little flavor, a little aroma, and we'll find it faster and eat it faster probably too.
All right. We'll take a couple of questions, and in the past, I've tried to field all questions about various topics. I'm going to try and filter through, frankly, to keep the questions on the topic at hand this evening. Again, Kim's generously volunteered his time here, and so we'll try and keep it fairly concise. I will mention, however, that when you log out of the webinar, you should receive a survey. If you would please take some time just to fill out those questions. I haven't charged for these in the past, and this one was free. You can consider filling out that survey payment for this this hour-plus conversation that we've had here this evening. And before we get too far into this, I know people just sort of start dropping off here. That's what's happened in the past. I'd just like to make sure that I thank Kim again for his time. He's a wealth of information, and really fortunate enough to have him here this evening to share some of that information with us. So Kim, I'm just going to read some of these questions out here, and we'll go from there. This is from Jennifer, who's in Denver, Colorado. Winter weather can range from 0 to 20 and 30 to 70 in February. how can we support bees through a big range of temperatures such as these?
I'm sure you've got the answer, Shane.
I'm the one reading the questions, Ken.
Oh, I see. Well, in a situation like that, when it's really cold or moderately cold, bees are going to take care of themselves in the cluster. When you hit that 70-day, in some respects, thank your lucky stars, because the bees get a break to get outside and do what we call a cleansing flight, and having them have that opportunity is nothing but good. At the same time, when you get warm spells like that inside the colony, they can rearrange themselves and sort themselves out. It gives them a chance to clean out some of the dead bees that may be on the bottom board, and to move around the colony and move towards more food. So I wish I had those kind of days in the winter up in northern Ohio. We don't, or very seldom do. So if you get them, I guess be thankful. But on the cold days, when it stays cold, you know, sometimes it's just out of your control. We had a stretch last winter, you know, and it was below zero for a lot of days, and a lot of bees starved just because they couldn't move. They couldn't break cluster and move that 2 or 3 inches over to that honey that was that close to them. And I say this somewhat facetiously when people ask this question, but this is why bees don't rule the world. It's because when it gets cold, they can't move.
I'll add that I think one thing that might help is, you know, the bees are active all year round, all winter long, and so they're consuming resources. Well, what happens is when they begin to fly, they really consume resources then. And so if you're getting a lot of those 70-degree days, they're going to start eating up some of their honey stores. And so if you're getting those sorts of temperature ranges, I would make sure that you maybe err on the side of more honey than less. And also what you might be able to do is people sometimes wrap their hive with or pack bags of leaves that they've raked up from previous fall sort of around their hive, and that sort of helps temper some of those real large temperature swings. So you can try that as well, but there unfortunately is no perfect solution there. Kim, you use 8-frame equipment, medium boxes, and we've got a question here of how many 8-frame hive, how many boxes should they use for overwintering, and do they need to provide fondant for each box within easy reach of the bees? I think I can take the first part here about how many boxes and sort of be vague and ambiguous about it and say that it really sort of depends on where you are in the U.S. Up north, Jim, you use 3 for winter, don't you?
I use 3, and after several winters, both easy and hard, I'm finding that I like 4.
Okay.
And the 4 is insurance. That's all it is. I've got more honey up there than I need. I would rather have that honey. I'd rather have a full super of honey in the spring on that 4 super than to not have any bees in the bottom 3. As far as putting fondant, it brings up a good point, because you're a little bit narrower, you're going to be a little bit taller to get the same amount of comb space in that colony, and that has been a problem, and it's one of them I try to monitor. And the way I found to monitor it is to do like you do, Shane. I'm doing some hefting, but my bees enter the winter. I try to get my bees in that 8-frame equipment to be about a third of the bottom box and the entire second box up. And there will be a little bit of honey actually below them. They actually will store some below them. They'll eat that early, and then they start moving up. And I found that has been a fairly consistent behavior, but I'm at 4 high, and sometimes in the spring you're up there 5 high, and I keep my bees up off the ground 18 inches and almost to the point where I'm beginning to wonder if I need a ladder. Because those colonies are getting pretty high. Anyway, to go back to the question, no, you don't need fondant in every box. If you've done a good job of providing food before, bees need that to get to it because they will move up. If it gets so cold they can't move, there's not much you can do about them anyway, I think.
What's the minimum freeze time for a drone frame? 24 hours? 4 days? If you're going to freeze...
To kill drone larvae?
Yeah.
24 hours at 0. It may take you a day to get down to 0, though, because you're pulling that out of a 90-degree nest. And it may take some time to get that cold. So you probably figure 2 days, at least 2 days at 0.
Okay.
Even if you don't kill them, you're going to damage them so bad that they won't survive.
Let's see. Just sort of. Bear with me.
While you're looking, Shane, let me add one more thing to that last question, to the person who asked that question.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of my answer. Of course, you've damaged the drone larva. That's not the issue. The issue is when you want to kill the mites. You'd hate to put a frame back in a colony and have the mites come out laughing at you. So again, I'll go back to, it's less important that you kill the drone larva. You're going to damage them at that cold, but you want to make sure that the mites are dead. And at least 2 days at 0 is in my experience, been sufficient.
Okay.
They're tough little critters.
They are. Here's a question about the sugar bowl. Actually, before I get to that one, I've seen several questions about drone frames. In terms of, the plastic frame that we showed in the slide was for a deep box. And do they make that in a medium? No, they don't. People have wondered if they can take that and sort of maybe run it through a table saw, take a hacksaw to it. You can certainly cut off the bottom couple of inches to make a medium frame out of it. It won't be quite as sturdy. But if you're in that sort of situation, you can also use what Kim does, which is the medium frame without any foundation whatsoever, and just let the bees draw out their own. Again, as he mentioned, it does cost the bees a little bit in terms of the honey they need to produce that wax. But I think both of us are in agreement that it's better to lose a little honey production and keep the colony alive and healthy than to try and milk every ounce drop of honey out of the hive. And I'll just reference the zucchini complex that you mentioned in your book, The Backyard Beekeeper, which I love that analogy, which is oftentimes beekeepers have more honey than they know what to do with, and suddenly they've got all this honey, and it's similar to a zucchini plant that you plant 4 thinking that'd be sufficient. Suddenly you're inundated with zucchini. So I'm sorry to continue on there, Kim. What were you going to say?
Well, another technique to use on drone comb, that, of course, when you put drone comb in a colony, you want to put it on the edge of your brood box because drones are raised, that's what drones are raised, because they're raised at about a degree or so lower, cooler temperature than workers. So you're going to want those frames on, I use them on 2 and 9, on a 10 frame or on the edge of the brood nest. You may even be moving them in more if you have a smaller brood nest. One of the things to consider is on those outside frames, bees often put honey. And if that's the case, one of the things that you can do is take one of those frames, cut the foundation in half, so you've got honey on top. They'll put honey in the top, and at the bottom, they will build drone comb. And you've got the same issue with they're using a lot of wax that you're harvesting. But it doesn't. You don't have to buy additional equipment, so you get to use the frame for honey and for drones, and on a smaller colony that works well because you don't need that much drone space.
We've got some questions here about powdered sugar, and how often should you dust?
I'll ask you that. You seem to have a handle on that, Shane.
I always take the vague and ambiguous approach. There's a couple variables. Someone actually emailed me today and asked me that very question, and And there's so many things that will affect sort of how effective that dusting is, and therefore how often you need to dust. And of course, the first is how tall is your hive? So and closely correlated to that often is how many bees are in that hive. And then two, or I guess it's three, what is your goal of this? A lot of people use powdered sugar not necessarily to control mites, but rather to manage them until they can use something else. Or maybe they're using drone trapping in conjunction, so they don't have to rely on the powdered sugar exclusively, but it's used in conjunction with something else. And those sorts of things will dictate a little bit on how often you need to dust. So if you want to use powdered sugar sort of exclusively as your management technique, I would say that you'd be best off dusting every single time you go into that hive. But also monitor your mites. If you dust every single time you go into the hive and you don't see any mites on your sticky board or in your sugar shake, it's working fairly well, and maybe you can get away with doing it every other time. But then if you're doing it every other time and you're seeing your mite population slowly creeping up, again, that trend information, then you've got to do it more often. And again, if you've got a really good, strong hive with lots of bees in it, you're going to have to dust more often because it'll be more difficult to get every single bee sort of covered with powdered sugar. And also, there's just simply going to be more of them. So it's sort of difficult to say. It depends a little bit on what you're trying to do, but I would say if you're going to use it exclusively, do it every single time. Was that vague and ambiguous enough, Kim?
I think it's good advice. I actually was waiting to hear what your answer was because that's exactly what I try to do. I don't make it every time just because of the function of time, but my goal is to do that every time, and for the exactly the same reason. It's easy, it's cheap, it's good insurance.
Mm-hmm. I was actually at one of the big box grocery stores not too terribly long ago, and they had a 50-pound bag of powdered sugar for $25. So it really can be, I mean, that's a lot of powdered sugar for someone who only has one hive or two hives in their backyard, but you can pick it up fairly inexpensively, and if you've got 10 hives, that 50-pound bag would probably treat you right for quite a few treatments.
Keep it dry.
What's that?
Keep it dry.
Yeah, so it doesn't get all clumpy and sticky. Yep. Yeah. How many days from a split do you requeen?
Well, what we were saying earlier, going by the technique that I was advocating there, is I wait until the queen cell's capped. So, you know, there's some variability in there. They you know, when will they start the queen cell? That day, a day later, 2 days later, is the temperature right? Is the food right? All of those things. So I wait until the queen cell is capped rather than count days.
Okay. Let's see here.
But you can figure, what, 6 or 7 right in there, right?
I would probably wait until the cells are capped, and it takes about 8 days from egg to capping. But you know, they're going to grab any egg possible, so they're going to grab a 3-day-old egg, which will be capped over in 5 days. So 6-7 days would probably be good until they're capped over.
Yep. A week.
Yeah. Does a summer split ruin your chances of a honey crop for the hobbyist? I guess the question is, if you're taking a split later in the summer from a strong colony that you were hoping to make honey from, perhaps. If folks are, correct me if I'm wrong, Shane. If I'm doing a late July, August split down where you are, the sourwood is done. I got nothing going on the rest of the year, right? Or very little. Yeah, there's we've got sourwood that's going to hopefully blossom here shortly. But after that, say mid-July, late July, there's nothing down here really going on. So it's certainly not going to heard anything down here, but up by you, I mean, you get a little bit of a dearth into July, but you get a tremendous goldenrod flow if you're looking to get some of that.
And I think my experience has been that tremendous goldenrod flow sometimes and sometimes not. And to me, most of that is it's winter food. So if I'm looking at if I'm counting on a honey crop being my fall crop, in a lot of places that's all you make, then I'm going to think real hard about that fall split. That may just not be in the equation. If I can get a summer split earlier during that dearth, we have a dearth. I always call it 4th of July. It's not quite correct, but it's a good benchmark, and I can do it then. I can build up probably both to make honey by late goldenrod, but then I have to look at, am I treating for Varroa? So I'm always monitoring for Varroa. So there's so many variables in there that to answer that question, yes and no. How's that?
Vague and ambiguous. Keeping with the trend. The point that's always worth making is that the bees don't read the book, so they're always making up their own minds and rules and doing things that we might not anticipate, which is why there's so many vague and ambiguous responses here. We're just, Kim, it's now approaching an hour and a half. I just have a couple of questions and then we'll call it good. And this is a good point of clarification. It's regarding counting mites on your sticky board. Are you counting just a square or the entire board? You're actually counting the entire board to get your, and then dividing by 3 because it's in there for 3 days to get your 24-hour count. Is that not true?
That's true, and one of the things to emphasize on there is during that 3 days, don't open the colony.
Yes, because that sort of disruption causes sort of a spike in drop. That's a very good point.
So yeah, 3 days.
Mark wants to know where you're from. I'll let you respond to that.
Where I'm from?
Yes.
I'm up in northern Ohio, not far from Cleveland. I'm far enough from the lake that I don't get good lake effect snow or bad lake effect snow, depending how you want to look at it. And I'm far enough north that I don't get the warmer weather that they get in central Ohio. So I'm kind of in the middle. I don't have to shovel my driveway very often, but I don't get to grow those nice tender plants that they do down in Worcester, 30 miles south of me.
Here's a question about Apagard, which is Dayton's product, has been advertised by our bee club. Formic acid, they're saying, has been known to be absorbed into the wax. The formic acid, the Mite Away 2 product, actually does get absorbed into the wax. That's exactly what it's intended to do, which at first thought sounds a little strange, and you're thinking, well, gosh, that's not a very good thing. But let me clarify. The formic acid, it's an organic acid. Formic acid naturally occurs in honey, and what they've done, the company that makes that, as well as other independent researchers, have looked at the concentration of formic acid in a beehive. And so they got sort of a base level formic acid concentration. They then applied the formic acid to the colony, and you're absolutely right. It did spike in the colony. It spiked. It was absorbed into the honey. It was absorbed into the wax. But the formic acid is a 21-day treatment. And so what they found was the pad that contains that formic acid actually lost a lot of the formic content within the first half of the treatment period. And it was actually the formic acid that was in the comb, which is good because remember where most of your mites are. They're under the cap. So you're actually getting mite kill under the cap, which is why we can get away with just such a short treatment of 21 days. But what was most interesting, I think, is that 2 weeks after that treatment, so a 21-day period, 2 weeks after that, they again tested the formic concentration of the wax and honey and found that it was right back to the starting point prior to treatment. So you're right, it does get absorbed into the wax, but it creates sort of a fume chamber over the entire treatment period and gases back out into the hive, and that's basically how it works, and it's sort of done that by design. Apogard is similar to Apolife Var in that it's a thymol-based product. It's dispensed a little bit differently and the treatment's a little bit different. Kim, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, you covered that exactly right, Shane.
Okay. I think we're at the 7:30 mark. I will just mention to you, Kim, we've got a heckler in the audience by the name of Jennifer, who's shown up. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all your questions, but again, Kim has been generous enough to volunteer his time. Again, I would encourage you to take the time to fill out that survey. It does help myself, and in this case, Kim also, in trying to, well, get the information into people's hands. And that's what this is all about. We are trying to get information into people's hands so that you're more successful at this and better beekeepers as a result. So filling out that survey will help in that regard. And again, Kim, I can't thank you enough for taking the time this evening out of your very, very busy schedule in life to spend this hour and a half with me. Thank you very much.
It's been a good time, Shane. Thanks for inviting me.
Not a problem. Thank you. And everyone, you have a good evening, and we're signing off.
Good night.